Welcome to the LumiCast, your premier gateway to the universe of limitless photo editing. Dive into the galaxy of Luminar software and the dynamic world of AI photo editing. Join us weekly for a burst of creativity and the drive to transform your photos with confidence and skill. Broadcasting directly from Clever Photographer headquarters, it's time to welcome your hosts, Jakub and Holly Linton.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of LumiCast, our brand new photography podcast where we're focusing on photography, photo editing, and of course, Luminar NEO. This is our 5th episode, but still, if you've never been here before, my name is Jakub. I'm a professional landscape photographer based in West Sussex, England, and more importantly, all the way from Tennessee. Virtually next to me is sitting the biggest fan of Luminar NEO in the United States, Holly Linton. Hello, Holly.
Hi, Jakub. Great to be here.
Yeah, great. We have a great episode lineup for you, and Holly actually is going to start by telling you what we're going to talk about today.
All right. Today we're going to be talking about 10 common photography mistakes and how to correct them in Luminar NEO.
That sounds really exciting, and we hope that it's going to be really helpful. So starting with the first one, what we have on the list?
All right. First up is digital noise. So basically, it's the grain that you see in your images, typically because your ISO is a little high. It could be either grayscale noise or even color noise. So how would we avoid that, Jakub?
Digital noise. That's my favorite. I actually used to do a photography review show on my YouTube channel. And so I would get photos from all over the world. And I think I look at, maybe 5,000 different images. And out of the list of 10 mistakes, the digital noise was definitely one of the most common one, because it's really something that can happen. How to avoid it in camera? Well, the easiest way is to go for lower ISO, which is not always easy, but that would be the main idea. So how to do that? If you're shooting during the daylight, during normal light condition, then try to make sure that you can adjust the ISO down using the controls on your camera. If you are shooting in low light situation and you need to go for maybe slower shutter speed, to still keep low ISO, use tripod. Basically, just put the tripod on, adjust your ISO to 100, maybe go for aperture mode where you set up your aperture to like f7.1 and let the camera decide how long it needs, because once it sits on a tripod, you don't need to worry about how long the shutter speed is going to be. If it's a 1/40th of a second or several seconds, it will not matter. So this is where the tripod can be really helpful. Additionally, what helps is to shoot in RAW, because the more data you're going to have, the better you can fix it later on in post-processing. So that can be also really helpful. So those are just some basic ways on how you can avoid the noise in a camera. And now let's talk about some of the tools you can use in Luminar NEO to fix or try to remove as much of the noise as possible.
Well, I know there's a few of them to choose from. In the Develop RAW, we have Denoise, and we also have a noiseless AI and a noiseless RAW. So would we be using a sort of a combination of all of those to try to get all the noise out?
As Holly mentioned, we have the Denoise tool, which works exactly the same as the Denoise tab in a Develop tool. So they are similar tools. They do the same thing. Basically, you're adjusting the luminance. That's to remove the grain-like noise, or you can also adjust the color slider in the noise reduction section, and that will try to adjust the color part. So the first thing you got to do, if you have a noisy image, is to try to use these tools, because they will just work with what you have in your image. They will not alter anything. They will just try to fix it from there. If that works, great. Don't worry about it and move on with your edit. If it does happen that these traditional noise removal or noise reduction tools are not working, then there is the option to use the noiseless AI or noiseless RAW. Ultimately, it's the same tool. It's just the noiseless AI works on JPEGs or non-RAW files, and the noiseless RAW works on RAW files. This is where, if the traditional tools are not working, then I would jump in with the noiseless RAW tool. You want to do it pretty much at the beginning of the edit when you have all the data, and run it and try to see how much it's going to help. So both the tools are very powerful. As I say, my traditional workflow would be to start with the traditional noise removal tools like Denoise or Develop tool and the Denoise section. And then if still needs little help, then I would go for the noiseless AR or noiseless RAW.
Great. So there's a few ways of doing it. And I just thought of something. Would it also be a good idea to set our cameras to a maximum ISO amount? Like, don't let the camera get to 12,800, or do you recommend that?
So that's a great idea and a great way to keep it in check. The one thing is not all cameras are able to do that. All the new products on the market now, they do have this possibility to adjust the maximum ISO, but some older cameras don't. So you want to keep an eye on it anyway. And there is just one slight risk of that. And that is that if the camera runs into the point where it cannot increase the ISO, it will again either start to increase the shutter speed. So it will make it longer, or it will start to play around with the f-stop. So no matter what you do, always keep an eye on the three things, and that's your ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, just to make sure that everything is in a natural balance. And even more importantly, one thing you always should do is when you take the picture, look at the back of the screen and see what you're getting.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
Next up, we have chromatic aberrations that show up in our images as color fringing.
Chromatic aberration. Avoiding it in camera, it's a little bit tricky because we need to understand how the chromatic aberration happens. And in very, very basic way, it's because of a certain direction and strength of the sun or light hitting the actual lens and coming through the number of different glasses. So as you can see, it's quite complicated. So there are two things you can do. One is to try to move the camera or the lens just in a little bit different direction towards the sun or light. And the second one is to try different lens. So regardless which one you choose, try and see if it's going to make any difference. But luckily for us, there are actually quite smart ways on removing the chromatic aberration in Luminar NEO. And Holly will tell us what are the tools we can use.
There's one way of doing it would be using Develop Raw, and down at the bottom of that tool, you can literally click the button that says Auto Fix Chromatic Aberrations. If you are editing a JPEG, you won't have all those options. There's only one button you can hit, which remains why it's important to shoot RAW and edit RAW pictures. Then there's another tool that you talk about duplicating a layer and somehow using the blur tool to get rid of it. Tell us a little more about how you do that.
Yes, there is another way on removing really heavy chromatic aberration in Luminar NEO. It takes few extra steps, but it really is worth it, and it can do much more than just the automatic tool. So the way it works, you take your image and you duplicate it. After that, once you duplicate it, you will go into your main editing toolbar, go into the blur tool, make sure that you on Gaussian blur, and zoom into the area where there is the chromatic aberration, where there are the colors. Once you zoom in, start to increase the blur tool until the color of the blur disappears. So basically, you just keep increasing it until it disappears. Now, at this moment, it is removing the color and it's softening the entire image. However, the final step and what you need to do is to go into the layer properties of this layer and change the blend mode from normal into the color. And once you do that, just like magic, the chromatic aberration will disappear. So it's a little bit complex, and I have a full tutorial on how to do that on our Clever Photographer YouTube channel, if you want to see it. But there is a way to deal with really heavy chromatic aberration by using these layers and color blending mode.
Well, that is a neat trip. I don't know how would anyone ever figure that out? They can only learn it here from Clever Photographer.
If I have to mention the person I learned it from, it's actually from Scott Kelby.
Great.
And he uses it in Photoshop. And by magic, it also applies to Luminar NEO. So I think that's quite neat.
All right. That brings us to number 3, which is sensor and lens dust. So those would be those dust marks that show up in your images. A lot of times, I think it's mostly visible, say in landscapes, if you have a sky in your image, that's pretty much where you'd see a lot of the dust spots appearing. How could we avoid that in our camera?
And how does it happen? Well, there can be lens dust and sensor dust. They can appear on both of the parts of your camera. Lens, I think, is a little bit easier to clean. You can use your cloth or the air duster, you can clean that. When it comes to sensor, I know that there is a number of tutorials around the internet on how to clean the sensor, but personally, and I've been photographing for years, I would never attempt to clean it myself. The easiest way is to take the camera, bring it to your local camera shop and let them clean it for you, or send it to a special camera store or specialized place, because once you make some or do something wrong to your sensor, it can be really tricky and it can also avoid the guarantee and so on. But worry less or worry not, there are actually quite smart ways to remove the sensor and lens dust in Luminar NEO.
And it's so easy. It's just a button that says dust removal. So you can try that before you get to bringing it to the camera shop or cleaning it yourself.
I think this is one of the biggest difference maker out there. People don't talk about it enough, I think, about this tool, because as someone who used Lightroom and Photoshop in past, going through every one of these dots and doing it manually is massive headache, especially when you're shooting in brackets or a panorama and you have lots of images you need to go through, then it's really time consuming. So to be able to do it with one click, it's incredible. Little trick question on you. If that automatic tool doesn't help, how could you do it manually in Luminar NEO?
You could just use the regular erase tool and individually do it.
Or worst come worst, you could try to use the clone tool as well. If there is like a really specific part, which maybe the erase tool is kind of damaging for you, then the clone tool is also great alternative.
Worst case, you just delete the picture, forget about it.
Yes. Or one way to avoid both noise and lens and sensor dust in sky is to do the sky replacement.
Mm-hmm.
If worst come worst and you have a really bad and noisy sky, then another way to replace it or remove it would be to change the sky.
Right. Or add a texture to it. Just make the whole thing
Exactly
extra creative. Cover it all.
That's true. You could go for vintage look and embrace the noise.
Add film grain to it.
That's it.
Okay. Mistake number 4, using the wrong white balance. So it's sort of a color, not color tone, but did you use the right color balance for the situation? If you were in daylight, but for some reason you had it set on tungsten, you're going to have a weird color cast to the image. What were some tips that you have to ensure the proper white balance?
So when it comes to white balance, that is probably the most important task or thing you need to do, and that's to shoot in RAW. Because if you shoot in RAW, you can very easily adjust the white balance in post-processing, just like you would do in camera. Problem comes when you shoot in JPEG, because then the white balance is actually baked in an image. You can still adjust it, but not to that degree as when you shoot in RAW. So if somebody would ask me how to deal with white balance or wrong white balance in camera, my first advice would be definitely make sure you shoot in RAW. And then if you make a mistake with the white balance, it's easily changeable or fixable in post-processing. There's one more thing I want to add to it here, and that's not just the white balance. When we're talking about tint, there are 2 tints that can happen to your image. One of them is blue and the other one is green. Sometimes you look at the image and the whole image feels really green or really blue. And this happens often on maybe not as professional cameras. When the sensor seeing a scene where there is heavy amount of this dominant color, light blue or green, what it does, it then starts to apply the color or the tint of the color to the entire scene. And again, it can be fixed in Luminar NEO with the tools that Holly will tell us now.
We can head into the Develop RAW, where we can adjust the temperature or tint. And if that does not work, we can head over to the Color tool and drag that color cast slider to see if that gives us a better result.
Then the image should look much better than when you start it. Again, coming back to my story from earlier, if you're getting too much green, then use the tint slider and push it towards the magenta. Or if you're getting too much blue, then take the warm slider or temperature slider and push it towards the warm, the yellow.
Great. That brings us to number 5, which would be clipped highlights and shadows, which basically is where we lose detail. Either the highlights are blown out and then the shadows are too dark.
That's it. So as Holly said, basically we're losing details in shadows or in the bright spots. So typical example is really powerful sun. When you don't adjust your camera properly, it will not look like a circle. It will just be this mass of white and bright in your sky. And equally with the dark parts, with your shadows, clip shadows, it will be just really dark areas without any details. So when you will look at it, it will miss sharpness or texture depth. So definitely this is also something to keep an eye on. Now, how to avoid it in a camera? Obviously, you want to adjust your camera right towards that specific scene. And depending on your camera, you can use a histogram to do that. You can keep an eye on where it's peaking. If you're not sure, I think the easiest way is to take an image, see what the result is at the back of your screen. And if you feel that it's too bright, use the exposure compensation. Just make it a little bit darker by bringing it down. If it's too dark, then the other way around, just use the exposure compensation and bring it up.
So as far as a first step would be going into Develop Raw, and I always hit the J key to see if those highlight alerts are coming on, the clipping masks are coming on. You'll see a red mask or a blue mask on your image if you need to make any adjustments. So you can either start dragging the blacks and white sliders till you see the clipping mask go away. And also you could use curves. You can pull some of those points, the blacks and white points, until the clipping mask goes away.
Very good. So that was the 5th most common photography mistake, which brings us very nicely to the halfway of the show, where we're going to take a little break. But don't go anywhere. We have lots of other cool tools or cool mistakes, I would say. We're going to talk about how to work with tilt, strong vignette, oversaturation, oversharpening, and more. So we'll see you in a moment.
If you're listening to the LumiCast podcast, then we share something in common. We love editing photos, and we love Luminar. It's almost breathtaking what this amazing tech can do for you. On our website, you'll find countless different things to help you be more creative than you ever thought imaginable. From our photo manipulation masterclass to our power bundle with 986 elements, our essential preset bundle, editing software and extensions to our tutorials. Harness the power at the website at www.cleverphotographer.com/Luminar. Again, that's cleverphotographer.com/Luminar. Now, back to LumiCast.
And we are back to continue with our list of the most common photography mistakes and seeing how you can fix them in Luminar NEO. So, Holly, what is the 6th mistake on our list?
The 6th mistake we've come up with would be pictures that are out of focus, that maybe just are a little bit blurry or a little bit of camera shake. Maybe you're hanging out the car window and yelling over to your friend to slow down. There's a deer I want to take a picture of. So the tool that you could use to fix that in Luminar NEO would be the super sharp extension.
When we're talking about how to avoid it in camera, obviously this has to do a lot with the shutter speed, depending on the subject. If nothing is moving, you can be quite chilled out. It's just the question of using a shutter speed. I would say around 1/40th of a second is as slowest as I would go by handholding the camera. If I need to go slower, so anything below 1/40th of a second, I would probably try to rest the cameras on something, ideally on tripod, but depending on the situation, you can use anything for that. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to use a little bit of your experience. So when you're capturing something that is moving, people, cars, any subjects like that, then you need to adjust the shutter speed to make it faster. 1/250th of a second works quite well for me for most subjects, but you can go even faster. Of course, when you go wildlife, you can go even faster. But I think for that, you need a little bit of extra experience. And I think the easiest way to do this is just to try and see what works the best, because that could be an entire episode on what shutter speed you need for specific subjects.
If you know the fundamentals of photography and know how to use your camera, there's really no reason that anyone should have a blurry picture.
Unless it's a creative decision. I have a friend who takes lots of classic photography, but also works on projects which are very abstract and artistic. And in that case, yes, you can really play around with it, but that is a more creative decision than lack of knowledge about the camera, right?
Right. Like intentional camera movement is a type of photography. All right. Off to number 7 would be tilt, not the Dutch tilts that we talk about on Luminar Coffee Break, but the wrong perspective. Either probably be mostly in architecture type of photography where the building doesn't look like it's straight or it looks like it's sideways or something. So the tool to use to fix that in Luminar Neo is in the develop raw down at the bottom, and it's the transform tool. With one click, it should straighten the picture. And if it doesn't, or it's not to your liking, there is a horizontal and a vertical tool you can use also to kind of pull the building to the left or the right until it looks straight. So what could we do to avoid that, taking the picture?
In camera, I don't know how many people knows, but at some point of my photography career, I actually worked for TripAdvisor and Trivago. Means lots of interior design, lots of architecture, buildings, mostly hotels and bars and bed and breakfasts. And this is where I was able to practice this over and over. And it was just for the reason of saving time. Yes, you can fix it in post-processing, but if you can get it right in a camera, it's one less step you need to do. So actually, you can buy little, how would you say that? When you want to make something straight, you can put it on top.
The level.
So you can buy a little level, which you can actually slide into your flash space on the top of the camera. And that really helps to find the exact level. That's exactly the word. Some cameras have it built in, but this was even more exact. So that helped me tremendously because most of the interior design, architecture, photographers and clients want everything straight, the walls, the buildings, and so on. So while, of course, that you can be creative, coming back to the previous point, there are ways to tilt your camera and get very special perspectives. When we're talking about that specific style, architecture, cityscape, you will be looking for straight buildings. So this is where I think in camera, you can use the automatic level if you have it. If not, then use this attachment you can buy for about £2 on Amazon, or simply just use the screen at the back of the camera and look at the result. Try to, even just adjust it based on what you see in front of you. So get it as right as you can in camera. And if it's not right, then you can use, as Holly mentioned, the develop tool with the automatic alignment.
That brings us to number 8. The 8th common mistake we said was a strong vignette. So that's when the corners of your image appear a little bit darker. And that could be either because of the lens that you're using just has a natural vignetting to it. And we could also be talking about post-processing when you're adding a vignette, that some people make that too obvious, that you should back off that a little bit so that you can't say, oh, that person put a vignette on their picture. So how could we avoid the vignetting in camera?
In camera or in Luminar Neo? The reason why I'm saying both is because there is really not as much as you can do in camera. The vignette in camera, or most likely in lens, will be there no matter what you do. You cannot adjust it. So the lens, some lenses have more vignetting than the others. This is why lots of photo editing softwares have the lens profiles. And based on that profile, they are able to, for example, remove the vignette. While you can't do much in a camera, you can do a lot in photo editing software like Luminar Neo. For us, it's going into, again, Develop Pro tool, where at the bottom you have the optics section. Make sure that all the corrections here are clicked on: chromatic aberration, devignetting, auto def range. And if it's still not helping, there is actually devignette slider. You can adjust, you can increase it. And by doing that, it will start to remove the vignette around the image. So that's if it happens through your lens. But when it happens during the photo editing, I think we talked about it in one of the past episodes. The problem is that our eyes, human eyes, they get used to certain view and certain look quite quickly. So let's say you're editing image for the last 20 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour. When you're looking at it over and over, you stop seeing things like saturation, sharpening, and also vignette. If you look at it long enough, you will think, oh, that's okay. It looks good. So one important thing is to take a break between the edits. So let's say you edit your image all the way. You really like it. So take it 10 minutes, go out for a walk, or get yourself a glass of water. I guarantee you by the time you come back, you will see it a little bit differently because your eyes just stop getting used to it. Another cool tip for the vignette is to very simply slide away from the computer. I suggest like a meter or two and look at the image again. And for some reason, I guess because of the optics or because of the way the eyes work, when you look at the image from far, you will see the vignette much better. And you will be able to see if you added too much or too little of the vignette. So those are the two ways to do it. First one, take a little break, come back and see how much of the vignette you applied. Second one, get away from your screen for a few meters and look at it again and see if that was going to help.
I agree with those tips for sure. And sometimes I'll wait till the next day to finish finish editing and I'll look at it and say, what did I do any of that for? And sort of start over. But with the vignette, adding a vignette in the post-processing, I kind of use my peripheral vision. I start pulling the amount slider of the vignette until I just start to see it come into the frame. And that's sort of my indicator of now I can let go of the mouse. So I agree with that. Stepping away, get out, stretch a little bit, and come back. All right, that brings us to our next problem area, would be oversaturating our pictures. You can just easily tell when something's oversaturated. It's too intense. The colors are over the top. That would be a way to describe it. Unrealistic. There's no way that landscape looked all those crazy colors. So there's obviously some ways in Neo to fix that would be don't do it in the first place. What would you say about that?
So the oversaturation is the common mistake in my experience. So what can you do? Well, the oversaturation is not coming from your camera unless you're shooting in JPEG and something is wrong with the camera. So it had to be done somehow on the way from the camera into your screen and photo editing software. That means most likely you have adjusted the saturation slider wrong. So one thing in the Develop Raw or Develop tool, you have a vibrance and saturation. What I would suggest if you want to add more color or punch to your image, start first by adjusting the vibrance. Because vibrance is like this smart sister of saturation. It will look at the image and it will only add saturation into these areas which are at the moment not saturated. So it will basically just push other areas, not just all the colors. Where the big sister, the saturation, she will just increase saturation of all the colors. So the colors which are already saturated will be even more saturated. And ultimately, the colors you wanted to be more colorful would just be, again, less colorful than the rest of them. So start with the vibrance. That's the one thing. And the second is another cool trick, which is basically opening the Develop tool, go into the color section, take the saturation slider and bring it all the way down to 0. Once you do that, bring your mouse on the slider, hold it, and don't look at the slider and the values, look at the image. Just keep an eye on the image because at this moment it's black and white. You remove all the saturation. Now start to bring the slider of the saturation up slowly towards the midpoint. And as you're going to do that, slowly the colors will start to appear. And basically, just keep going. Don't look at the slider and the numbers. And only let go when through your eyes, the image looks natural. The colors looks good. And you will be surprised how many times people let go with the saturation on like -25, -30. And it looks perfectly fine. It's perfectly well saturated. It looks nice. It has a good contrast and punch. It's just that mentally, we as humans, we have an attachment to the numbers. So if I tell someone, just bring your saturation down to -25, they will be telling me, no, that's too much. You cannot do that. You will lose all the colors. Which actually it's not the case, because if it was already super saturated, -25 means nothing. But we have that attachment to numbers. It's like sometimes I tell somebody, bring your exposure to -2. It will go crazy, you can't do that. It will be so dark. No, but try it, because it's not about the number. It's about what it's going to do to your image. So this is why this little tip or trick on how to adjust the saturation works well with the fact that you're not looking at the numbers and the slider, you're looking at the image, which is the most important thing.
I have a question that might stump you. A lot of men are colorblind, and I've always wondered how someone who's colorblind can edit photos and what can they see and not see when they're tweaking some of the colors.
That actually brings a great story I have. So I was with Skylum and Luminar NEO on the London photography show. And one of the visitors there and main guests was Joel Grimes, which is a very famous portrait photographer, amazing guy. He stopped by the booth and he talked with us for about half an hour. He, by the way, loves using Luminar NEO as a part of his workflow, so that's quite cool. But what I didn't know, he's completely colorblinded. Like he cannot see colors. So everywhere he goes, there is a very lovely lady standing next to him, which, by the way, is his wife. And his wife does the color proofing for his images. And I find that incredible. I find incredible that this guy who is super well known as a photographer, highly respected and followed, actually can't see colors. And to top the story, one of my big idols in photography world is Trey Redcliffe, who is recognized as the father of HDR photography, he cannot see with one eye. He can only see with one eye. And also his colors are a little bit adjusted. So I'm always fascinated how people with such a handicap make it all the way to the top. So there is a way to work even with the colors.
I didn't stump you with that question. You had an answer for it. It's really interesting.
So you need to have a wife to help you.
Yeah, hopefully she gets half of his earnings. All right, well, we're on to our 10th common mistake, which is over-sharpening our photos. When the edges and details are just too emphasized, the image looks harsh and unnatural. In Luminar NEO, I guess one way of avoiding that would be don't over-sharpen. Don't pull that slider to the extremes. And you have to find the balance between the sharpening and the noise reduction and balance those out. And what else would you say?
The over-sharpening doesn't naturally happen in camera because if you're shooting in RAW, the files don't have much sharpening in them. So it is something that commonly happens during the post-processing. Luminar NEO is an example where it can happen. And the reason is that there is several places around the software where you can adjust sharpness. Just from the top of my head, you can adjust sharpness, obviously, in Develop Tool. You can also adjust sharpness in Structure AI, Details Tool, Noiseless AI, Super Sharp AI. And some people misunderstand and think that all of these sliders do something different. But actually, the sharpening slider is all same. It does the same thing. It increases the contrast between the individual pixels. So darker pixel, brighter pixel. And as you increase the slider, it will make the brighter, brighter and darker, darker. That's all it does. And when you go far enough, it will look crazy. As Holly said, it just look unnatural, over-detailed. And when you look at it, similar to the saturation, when you look at on over-sharpened image, it hurts your eyes. It just doesn't look very good. So one way to do it is to be very gentle with the sharpening. Use it only at one location. So if you're doing your sharpening, do it in the Develop tool, for example, and then only apply a little bit more if you need to. Another common mistake I see is that people edit their image and everything is good, and then they export the image and they apply additional sharpening during the exporting. So people are often wondering, why are my pictures so sharp and over sharpened? When I look at it on a screen, it looks good. And the reason is that there is an option to add additional sharpening on exporting, and you want to keep an eye on that because you can switch it on or off, and it's something that people often forget about.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that a new user, a new editor would not know, because I've asked you the question and I've been editing now for 5 years and I still don't quite understand it. How much sharpening is enough?
No, you're 100% right. It can be really tricky and it can be a little bit overwhelming.
All right, well, we've run down all 10. I mean, I think there's so many more, but we had to narrow it down.
Definitely, because as usual, we are running long, but there was a lot to cover in today's episode. And I'm really excited because today we talk about the 10 common mistakes, but next week we're going to be back. And this time it's Holly who's going to teach us because she's going to talk about her favorite lenses. Holly, what are you going to talk about?
I'll teach you a little bit about Lens Baby lenses. They're artistic manual lenses that I've been using for a few years, and there's so much to say about them, but people still never heard of it, which I always find surprising. And you had never heard of it. So I'll be teaching you a thing or two next week.
I can't wait. I already can't wait. So for today, folks, thank you very much for joining us. It was a lot of fun. Holly, thank you for joining us as well.
My pleasure.
And we will be back again next week on Friday with the baby lens babies.
And that's a wrap. Now, there's only 3 things left to do. Subscribe to this podcast so you never miss a future episode. Visit our website at cleverphotographer.com/LumiCast to see what we have in store next. And stay creative and keep editing your photos no matter what anyone says.